That's my Cecil Taylor strut.
Thanks so much, Imran, for that fantastic introduction. And Gerard, it's such an honor to have you with us here today.
Thank you. It's been a real treat. I've been going around taking pictures of trees all day, and it's quite fascinating. And I'm a sucker for animals, so I have animals outside my cabin, goats and chickens. I mean, they're just a delight.
You've been a huge inspiration to me, Gerard. You know, as a poet, as a photographer, as an artist, as a creative force, you have really contributed a staggering amount to culture. So I'm really honored to be able to to be able to talk to you and introduce your story to BOF Voices.
Thank you. I can't keep track of all that. I wouldn't know where to begin.
Well, we're going to start at the beginning. So if this clicker works, we can see the cover of your autobiography.
Oh.
And there's this photo is you and your father, right?
That's right. I was, I think I was 10 or 11. It was the day of my first Holy Communion.
You're a very handsome young boy.
Thank you.
And stylish.
We're a rooftop snapshot, I put together a dummy for the autobiography to see where the pictures would go in the book. So this was the cover for the dummy, and the title is inspired by Marcel Proust's book that was mistranslated many decades ago called Remembrance of Things Past. I added the preposition at the beginning, but his book is called In Search of Lost Time. And for decades, I promised myself that I would read all of Proust, but I never found the time to do that. And then one day I was in Milan, visiting friends, and then on the way home, I was looking at my daybook calendar, and I saw that the next 6 to 8 months was completely empty. I mean, I didn't even have a doctor's appointment. And I said at that point, I made the concerted effort to start reading Proust. And the idea was that I found a new edition with a new translation that was 5 volumes. And so the plan was that I was going to read 1 volume and then read some junky thing and then go back and read the 2nd volume and work my way through Proust that way. Well, that idea got thrown out the window. Because once I started reading, I couldn't let go. I became totally obsessed with Proust. And even at night, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd read 2 or 3 pages. I was completely taken by this magnificent piece of work. And so finally, at the end of that, just around the time that I finished the 5th volume, it took me 5.5 months to read the entire 5 volumes. And then a friend of mine, we were out having dinner, and he said, if ever you want to write your autobiography, I'll help you edit it. And that's how it started. So it took me about 3 or 4 years to write the book. Any publishers out here?
It's a fantastic book, and it's still looking for a home, so I'm sure it won't be long before it finds a publisher.
Yeah.
But describe what life was like for you in the Bronx in the late 50s.
The Bronx was it's gotten a bad rap in the 1960s, but I grew up in the early 1950s in the Bronx, and it was a wonderful place to grow up in. I was filled with curiosity. I'd walk around the neighborhoods on my own even, and just discovering things and doing things and just observing and taking in a lot of things that I would remember later on.
So how does a young boy from the Bronx end up meeting Andy Warhol?
I believe that I have a guardian angel. I've always believed that, actually. And I had Andy and I had a mutual friend, a surrealist poet. He always made sure I would say that he was a surrealist poet, Charles Henry Ford. And he knew that I had previous silk screening experience. At the age of 17, I worked for a very distinguished textile designer named Leon Heck. And I got the job through my English teacher in high school who introduced me to the world of poetry. And I went to see Leon, and he hired me to assist his textile chemist, Charles Singer, and it was there that I learned the skills of silk screening at the age of 17. I loved it. It was a lot of fun, actually. And then I went off to school. After that, it was just a summer job. And then 3 years later, Charles Henry Ford arranged for me to meet Andy, because Andy was looking for a silk screen assistant. And I'm pretty sure I was hired before I even met Andy.
And at that point, Andy didn't have anyone else working with him on his art.
No, he was working with small screens too at the time. So, but now he was working with big screens, and he did need someone to help him. And it's sort of like when you get off, if you learn how to ride a bicycle and then you don't ride the bicycle anymore, and then 3 years or 5 years later, you get it back on the bicycle, and then you know immediately how to ride a bicycle. Well, that's the way it was for me. I knew everything there was to know about working with Andy with his silk screens.
So you were a published poet. Charles Henry Ford introduced you.
Yeah.
You had this incredible silk screening experience because you were working in the textile factory.
Mm-hmm.
And then you met Andy, and this is you and Andy silk screening in the...
And the silver factory.
That's in the silver factory, okay.
Yeah, that picture was taken in, I think it would have been 64, because I see it's a big flower painting.
Because when you first met Andy, it was previous to the silver factory. So at that time,
Yeah.
you were in what was called the firehouse, right?
Well, it was an abandoned firehouse. It was owned by the Department of Buildings of New York City, and Andy rented the building.
So what was your first day at work like? What happened on your phone? Did you just rock up and
Well,
there was Andy Warhol and there was a silk screen?
Well, first I met Andy that Sunday. It was at a cocktail reception at the new school, and that's where I met. And I saw this person coming towards me. He looked like a Martian, silver hair, sunglasses, and we were introduced. And the first thing out of Andy's mouth was, "Well, when can you come and work for me?" And I said, "Well, I said, when do you want me to come to work for you?" And he said, "How about tomorrow?" And I said, "No, I can't come tomorrow. I'll come on Tuesday. I have to close down my desk at school." So I went to visit Andy at the firehouse on Tuesday, and it just so happened there was a photographer there who was a former classmate of Andy's, Edie was his name. Very sweet man, and he was about ready to leave, and he took the last few pictures of me and Andy together. Here's my first day on the job, and I'm being documented for history. I mean, it's like, that's so bizarre. My life is bizarre like that sometimes, but...
It's been very well documented, and we're going to see some more of that in a minute. But you made you were silk screening the Marilyns, you were silk screening the double Elvises, all these iconic works that are in museums and collections and being sold for an absolute fortune.
I never think about
on
that.
auction. At auctions.
Where's my cut? No. But speaking about the silver Elvis paintings,
But they went to the that was his second show at the Ferris Gallery.
That was Andy's second show, but it was his first show where Andy and I and two friends actually traveled across the United States in a station wagon, and we even went on Route 66. And
so for the show in LA, you decided that you were all going to get in a station wagon and all just
it was
drive
kind of arranged. We were going to, I don't know how we were going to get to LA. Andy doesn't drive, and I don't drive. And but we had these two friends, Taylor Mead and Win Chamberlain, and it was Win's car, and somehow they wanted to join us, and we said, okay, we'll go out together, the four of us, the Mad Hatters, and the double silver Elvises was something I came up with because we were doing these single Elvises, just one after another. And I said, well, why don't we superimpose, like here, for instance? Even this is less radical than some of the other superimpositions. But Andy said, okay. Andy was always open to my ideas, so we moved the screen over slightly, and we did it a double, and it came out fine. Andy loved it, I got the idea from Cecil Beaton, from some of his photographs. that were in early issues of Vogue.
Did it feel at that time when you were traveling across America, the moment of that show at Ferret's Gallery, did it feel like you were at the beginning of something really special?
Well,
making history in the way that we now see it in hindsight?
I can't say it at the immediate moment, but I always felt whenever we did something that it was important for some future date, whatever that date would be. I have no idea, but I felt that I had that feeling. I mean,
there's a famous photograph of you giving one of these double Elvises to Bob Dylan at the factory.
Yes. Bob didn't like.
And then
Andy.
he strapped it to the top of a Beetle or something.
What?
Did he strapped it to the top of his car outside?
Yeah. Well, he came with a friend of his, Bobby Newworth, who was a sometimes folk singer, and Andy gave Bob the painting because he was kind of a bribe actually. He tried to convince Bob to be in one of his future movies. Sadly, that didn't happen. In fact, Bob Dylan's manager, Al Grossman, put a nix on that. But I filmed Bob Dylan that day with my movie camera. So he's in my movie, actually, called Gerard Malanga's Film Notebooks. Some very interesting footage, lucky footage, actually. But back to the strapping. So what happened was, Andy gave, he showed a few paintings, and I think Bob actually picked out this. It was a double Elvis, actually.
Yeah.
But the second Elvis is a ghost. It's not as clear as the other one. It's very interesting how that happened. Of course, the silk screen dried, so there was less paint going through the screen onto the canvas. So it created this kind of ghost image of Elvis next to Elvis. And so at the end of the afternoon, they brought the painting down and strapped it onto the top of their station wagon like it was a dead deer, and drove it back up to Woodstock, where Bob was living at the time.
So I read another story.
Yeah.
Not another story, but the follow-on story, which is that Bob swapped it with his manager for some furniture, for like an antique piece of furniture.
No, it was actually just a couch, a studio couch or something.
What, even worse? He swapped it for a cheap studio couch. Okay.
That's how much Bob Dylan loved Andy. I mean, he loved him so much that he traded the painting for a couch that was worth, $100.
So here we are in this picture. Here's you and Andy in the silver factory.
Yeah,
and
we had a payphone. That's a payphone in that photograph.
And it's all silver, famously silver, because Billy Name.
Well, he spray painted and hand painted, mostly spray painted, the walls.
So that wasn't your idea then?
No, that was Billy's idea. Andy and I went to a party at Billy Name's. Billy Linick was his real name. He had an apartment on the Lower East Side.
And his apartment was all silver, right?
Yeah, his apartment was also. We went to this cocktail party. It was just a hangout party at Billy's apartment, and we walked into this apartment. It was all silver, And Andy liked the idea of silver because silver was a metaphor for machinery and modernity. And so he asked Billy if he could come to the factory, which we newly acquired on a rental basis. And could Billy do the same thing with the factory? Billy said, yeah, sure. So he came up, and in the course of him doing this work, he moved in, and I got moved out. Anyway, that's how it happened. So
this is a still, right, from the set, or
this is a still
from vinyl. Is that right?
Well, yes, it is. It's what's happening. It's actually what do you call it? A production test or a techie test. And
so you went from being behind the camera to being an assistant to silk screening with Andy to then being in front of the camera.
Well, Ronnie Tavel wrote a script for me, especially for me, but I was going to be the lead character in a movie called, it was originally supposed to be called Leather, but Andy thought the word leather was too corny, and he liked vinyl because it had that modern sound to it. So anyway, the film ended up being called Vinyl, and I played the part of Victor, who is the character in the book, Anthony Burgess's book, Clockwork Orange,
yeah.
In which 4 years later, when I went to see this movie, Clockwork Orange, with my girlfriend at the time, Lee Taylor Young, I saw Malcolm McDowell playing my role in the movie. It was very funny to see that, actually. I thought he was pretty good, actually. And I thought I was terrible in my role, but I think over the wine, over the decades, the film has taken on a vintage feel about it, like it's like a vintage wine. It tastes better with time. So anyway, this is a sound test. There I am. I'm about ready to do my dance routine. In fact,
There are clips of this on YouTube for those who want to do a little bit of research afterwards, but you're a fantastic
my opening
dancer.
line, I still remember my opening line, but I forget the rest of it. I start out, I have the chain in my hand, and I go like this. And I says, what did I say? I want to beat people up. I'm a JD. I want to beat people up. And then I forget the rest. But
It was the 60s.
yes. And Edie Sedgwick was, this was her first part in the movie. It was an all-male cast. But I got upset because Andy threw Edie in the movie. But actually it worked out fine because she was a good foil for me. And so she's in the movie.
But she didn't have any speaking lines.
That's right. She had no speaking lines. So she was basically a prop sitting on a silver trunk, actually it was.
But you made another film with Edie, and you and Edie spent a lot of time together at the factory. So here's a picture of you and her together.
Yeah.
Tell us about this photo.
Well, I don't know too much about this. It would have been taken in the end of '65 or early '66 because of this big flower painting in the background. Andy and I made maybe 2 or 3 of those paintings of that size, which was really gigantic. And I don't know what we were doing. I think this was just the beginning of the Velvet Underground phase.
And was Edie's death a significant moment for you? Did you see
Well,
it
we
coming,
hadn't.
or was it a shock?
I don't know if I saw it coming, and I don't know if it was a shock. I felt sad about it, of course. Andy probably didn't show any emotions at all. In fact, he said something very catty. I thought he said, "Oh, I thought she died a long time ago." Anyway, so she was living in Santa Barbara at this point. I hadn't seen Edie. She died in '72. I hadn't seen Edie since '69. I ran into her in the street one night in the Lower East Side. She was not in very good shape. And she had remarried, not remarried, excuse me, she got married to a young guy in Santa Barbara, and they went to a party, but she took some pills, and then it got mixed up with alcohol, and so she had this OD attack.
She was the biggest star in a way of the factory scene, and its greatest tragedy as well. So, you know, a kind of important story and lesson.
Yeah, there's a lot. Perhaps what do you call it? A lesson, a tale. I forget the word is. It's the coinage. It was. She had basically a lot of problems dealing with family at the time, before we even met her. And but she had her really great moments as a human being, very, very warm, and we had a very close friendship, and
immortalized in the films.
Yeah,
and the photography.
2 weeks after we made vinyl, we actually made a movie with Edie called Poor Little Rich Girl. And we had a technical problem with the movie, because Andy shot it, and when we got the film back from the lab, it was all out of focus. So we had to reshoot the movie, like a couple of days later, luckily. And so Eddie, we had this concept. We would show the first reel that was out of focus, and the second reel was in focus. So there was no real break. There was a real continuity.
That's art, right?
It is. The very Duchampian idea.
So this is you with the Velvet Underground.
Yeah,
So
kind of a PR shot.
how did the Velvet Underground end up in the factory with Warhol? How did you end up dancing with the Velvet Underground and becoming their choreographer?
Well, first of all, when I was 16, I was in my last year in high school, and writing poetry at that point. And I ran into a friend of mine on the street from the Bronx, but this was in Manhattan where I was going to school. And her name was Judy Klein, and Judy knew that I loved to dance. I was really into dancing. And she was on her way to a TV studio where Alan Freed was having a live television show that was, well, it was actually, it inspired actually Dick Locke to do his show.
Like a kind of Top of the Pops of its time.
Alan Freed.
Is it?
What?
I never saw it.
No, it was called The Big Beat.
Yeah, but like a music show with dance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a music show with dancing. The technology wasn't advanced in those days, so because they had live performers on rock music.
But that's way before this. I mean, I thought the story was that Barbara Rubin.
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Because you said, how did I get involved with this? So I went with Judy to the TV show, and I became a regular on this TV show until 2 months later when Alan Freed got busted for what was called payola, which is where DJs get paid for playing music. Now they do it, it's like nothing, you know. But anyway, so when the situation with the Velvets happened, I don't know how, I mean, I just started dancing. Barbara Rubin took me to see the Velvets at a cafe in Greenwich Village. And she had come to the factory. No one was there except me. She said, I had this great group, you got to hear them. And she dragged me down to this cafe. This was like, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I happened to have my whip with me. And it was, I bought it.
As you do.
I bought it as an accoutrement. It was a fashion statement. I wasn't thinking S&M or anything. I didn't even know about that stuff in those days. And so we went down to this cafe, and there were people, sitting around, young kids sitting around on tables. It was a real cafe called the Cafe Bazaar in Greenwich Village, and there was no stage, so there was one flat floor. So the Velvets were tuning their instruments, and then they started playing, and Barbara said, "Oh, get up and dance, go ahead." And I said, "Well, okay, get in the way, I'd be a distraction." She said, "No, they won't even notice you." So I got up and I started dancing to the Velvets music. Nobody else was getting up dancing. That was the weird thing. So I had my whip. At some point I pulled it out and I started dancing with the whip in front of the Velvets. And then all of a sudden a lot of people started getting up from their chairs and started dancing to the music. It was really incredible. And then during intermission, the Velvets came up to me and said, "Oh, come back. You made everybody, we wanted people to dance and no one was getting up dancing." It was like some miraculous thing happened. And so a couple of nights later, I brought Andy back to the cafe to hear them, and there was a group of us, Andy and Nico and Al Aronowitz, a music critic, rock and roll music critic, and a couple of other people. And it was at that moment that Andy decided to invite the Velvets to use the factory as a rehearsal studio.
So when you were silk screening with Andy from then on, there was always the sound of like the Velvets in the background. That's how I imagine.
No, not really. Sorry to disillusion
Burst my
you.
bubble.
It was usually opera that we silk screened to. Like Turandot or one of the great operas. But I think probably eventually we did play Velvets music.
So this is you and Andy behind the camera, and
Yeah, we're
to the right,
chit-chatting.
to the right is some stills from you,
Yeah.
which is famously the screen test that you made.
Yeah,
So-
that was a portrait for the book that I did called Screen Test.
So you helped Andy discover this format, the screen test, which became a very iconic series of.
Well, in a way, I needed a publicity shot because, I was thinking, well, if I'm going to go do poetry readings, you got to have a publicity shot, So I wanted to fashion something different than just a click on a camera. I thought it would be nice to do something with the movie camera because we were using the movie camera. Andy was already shooting other movies with this Bolex that he had, including Sleep. So I set the camera up and composed the shot, and Andy pressed the button on the camera because it had a motor drive that allowed you to shoot for 3 minutes straight without stopping. And that's how it happened. And then I picked these 2 frames out that I liked, and I sent them to a lab, and they blew them up for me as a print. And I said to Andy, let's do more of these. This is a lot of fun. We could, invite people to the factory and they could sit down and have their screen test done. And that's how the screen test.
And then hundreds of people ended up being documented in that way.
Yeah, over almost a 3-year period, we did about 500 screen
So the
tests.
setup was that the camera was there. It was a Bolex. It was 3-minute can of reel of film.
Yeah.
And the person would be asked to stare in front of the stare at the camera.
Or they could do anything they wanted. They could stare at the camera. They could turn their head away from the camera. It was like anything that you allowed your imagination to be carried away.
They became
with
these moving portraits, right?
Yeah.
These moving paintings in a way.
Yeah, they were.
That's how you describe them, right?
Yeah, I would call them like.
What was
moving
special
paintings.
about them?
Well, they had an archival feel to them. I mean,
Here's Salvador Dali and Edie stills from their screen tests.
yeah, Salvador Dali.
But what's interesting in the 3-minute arc is that people lose their self-consciousness. So for the first minute, in a way, people are putting on their face or there's an awareness in their expression that they're being filmed. But it's very hard to maintain that. So there is always a kind of moment where the self-consciousness
That
gets
has
lost.
happened. That's happened.
And that's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, people became very natural about it. And it was the great thing about doing these film portraits is that, sometimes people would feel a little queasy or they didn't understand the setup, but people basically opened themselves up as the film started rolling and
I love them. I think they're really
capture
beautiful.
those moments, being in front of a movie camera. Because not everybody sits in front of a movie camera.
So then, from those kind of auto portraits, this is you with a rig filming.
That's a 35 millimeter movie camera.
So tell us about this. What's going on here,
I was shooting a movie in an Italian movie process called Technoscope, and in Rome. And actually beyond the screen door, it was a hotel room that Anita Pallenberg and Keith Richards had. They were there while I was making this movie. That was their hotel room at the hotel, I forget the name of it, really nice hotel at the top of the Spanish Steps. I was going to say the Ritz, but it's not. The what?
Hazlitt's. Hazlitt's?
Oh, the name of the hotel? They must have changed the name. Anyway, and it was a rainy day. That's why we had the umbrella on top of the camera.
Now, you made several films. Can you tell us about some of the films that you made? So there's In Search of the Miraculous. There's The Pre-Raphaelite Dream, which stars Lulu de la Falaise.
Yes. Well, after I left Rome, I went back to New York, and
Because this is all post-Warhol, right? So you've left the factory.
Yeah. No, well, I came back to the factory afterwards.
Oh, really? Why?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I was away in Rome, and I came back.
For like a year?
Well, 9 months.
Okay.
And so in that interim period, I met Lulu de la Falaise for the first time, and she was 19 at the time, and she was just as wild as a horse in the field. And I borrowed a friend's movie camera. I didn't even have a movie camera at that time. And decided to shoot randomly like I was doing a notebook, which I was doing. And so Lulu is one of the stars of this movie. It's called Pre-Raphaelite Dream. And my mother's in the movie, and then there's a poet named John Wieners. He's in the movie too. And we became lifelong friends from that point on. She had just separated from her first husband Desmond Fitzgerald, and her stars were already set for her, you know, but it took a while for things to gel, and eventually in 1970, she got hired by Yves Saint Laurent as his muse. He hired her as the muse. She was a very inspiring person, actually, and she worked for Yves until he died.
So Gerard, we've almost run out of time.
Oh, I got a poem to read.
And I promised that you'd be able to read a poem.
Yes.
One more question. What's
Yeah.
the secret to a life well lived?
Curiosity.
Great, one
Curiosity
word.
about life.
Keeps it simple.
Now, I'm going to finish this with a poem I wrote last February. The backstory is very circuitous, so I'm not going to get into that, but I'll just say this, that this poem was written out of an epiphany I had while writing the poem, to such a degree that it took me the next day to come down. And it's a poem I wrote for a photograph that I somehow had a fantasy about, which some of you have probably seen this picture before, of Virginia Woolf at the age of 20 in 1902. The photographer was named George C. Beresford, and in the poem I become the photographer. And it's an out-of-body experience that I'm having. And the poem went into 3 drafts in the course of nearly 3 hours sitting, and then I knew I had it. It was a done deal. So it's called Virginia Woolf, July 1902. Excuse me, I have to look for my glasses. Virginia Woolf, July 1902. You know, Ginia, that's what your dad called you. I could knock you off your feet if I had to. Do I want to? On off days, staring through that leaded upstairs window at those rolling, foaming, sweeping waves with only hints of echoings overlooking St. Ives Bay as I catch you in a state of reverie. For all those hours past, those decades even separating us. Simply no way reaching back in time, in reaching you, rewriting history even. Well, that's not true. There are many, many dreams between 4 and 6, bewitching you and me. Had I not told you? Any one of them, you've appeared suddenly. Astonish me! And you've astonished me. And that nearly full profile you've given me, as with all of you, as suddenly you turn away at that undecisive moment when the snapshot clicked, immortalizing you, but never meaning to. Ginia, where are you, darling? Sometimes a picture reveals far more past that instant of distracted revelation. I can touch you on the neck. How's that? The swan's down neck, perfumed, shouldered by that soft white linen smock. And so I breathe in deep and hold it all, well, not all. The way you've held that pose, then let it go. I'm always photographing you and jostling with you. I've yet to let you laugh, but I've not shot that shot yet, nor now. Where is now? You're too quick for me, and I for you. Let's hold each other's silences until it's time to dream and sleep in which to save it all. Thank you. Thank you.